This is Nick Christophers from Mob Tales. Thanks for joining in. It's been a bit since we had our last show, which was with Louis Katzman, the the adopted quote unquote adopted son of John Gotti Jr. Today we have an interesting guest, Carrie Butler from the nice state of Texas. She has a very colorful background, and we look forward to interviewing her. Carrie, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All good. Um, well, Carrie, just to let people know a little bit about you, I'm going to tell them that Carrie has a very colorful background, very well educated uh, young lady that has done a lot of good things in her career. One of them is what we're going to be talking about today is her work with gang-related individuals, young guys that were mixed up in that life, and her guidance and education to get them to kind of like redeem themselves and get in a better life. Uh, and that's one of the things, and among other things, she's worked with law enforcement as well. So before we even get into all that heavy stuff, uh, if Carrie can, you can tell us a little bit about your background and what your education, things like that, and how you got involved in this type of work.
Sure, thank you. Well, I am from upstate New York, so north of Syracuse in a town called Watertown. And so I grew up in a small area, and I can tell you that I was probably one of the last ones that you would think that would go on and get my terminal degree in any field. I was a good kid, I think, but I didn't take my studies seriously really not until I got into college, and it just seemed like people were going into college, and I graduated in 1988, and that was most people were heading that direction, the people that I knew anyway, so I figured it was something I should do. And then once I got to college, I realized I liked learning, and then I just started going from there. And so I went to school, started out in teaching, and then got into counseling. And one of the things that really changed my mind about teaching and going into counseling was I was doing some student teaching at an inner city school in upstate New York, and I remember asking this young guy in there, what his goals were, and his goals really, weren't that high. He figured that he would probably, be unemployed and kind of take that route, like some of his other family members. But he was so bright, and I just became more interested in, what, we have to work on some of this stuff first before we can even talk about, what their future is going to be like if they either want to go to school or if they want to enter the workforce. So I became much more interested in encouraging young people and figuring out how I could help them to make their lives more successful. That sounds pretty honorable, but I didn't set out to do it. It's something I stumbled upon. So it was just something in my journey that I like to say it was my addiction in a way, because I really became almost just on a path driven to help other people. And even today, it's where I find myself the happiest. So, but I did that for, I went to school there, finished at St. Lawrence University, and then I moved to Texas with a friend. Did not plan on staying in Texas. I was going to go on to another school in Missouri, but then I decided to stay in Texas, and I put myself through school. I was the fourth of four. My parents didn't have the money to send me to college. So, I was determined, this is what I was going to do. And so I was paying for school myself. So I needed a job, right? So I applied to a program. It's called the Youth Diversion Program. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was a program that was initiated by law enforcement, the cities of Hearst, Euless, and Bedford, Texas. And that's where I was staying with my friend and her family at the time. And so I ended up getting this job, and I learned a lot. I didn't have any experience with law enforcement in my past, but I learned a lot about law enforcement by working with them and just what they see day in, day out with, even working accidents and scenes, suicide scenes, other traumatic accidents or situations. And that's a side that most civilians don't have to worry about seeing. And probably like you, Nick, you probably have seen some things in life that most people can't even relate to, right? And so I was exposed to that really for the first time, and I have a tremendous admiration for people that are in those situations, because we, the general population, are fortunate enough where we don't have to see that, day in, day out. And so then, I just buckled down and finished my education in Texas, and I worked for the gang unit in Hurst Euless in Bedford, Texas, and I developed a program. It's school-based programs, and it's still one of the best jobs I've ever had, because I love the kids, and I think that there's a point in time where um, they start questioning, what am I going to do with the rest of my life, or how am I setting my life up, either for success or failure? And those are the ones I really like to talk to, and just try to reel them back in and try to help them understand what it is that they want to do, what's their potential. Because they're our next generation. We have to invest in them, and there's so much potential out there that goes wasted by kids that don't have the opportunity to really develop their potential, right?
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah.
Well, like we mentioned earlier, and you just hit upon it before I can even bring it up, which is fine. You mentioned working in excuse me, in the gang unit.
Mhm.
Now, can you give us a little bit more of an understanding in what capacity exactly?
Okay, so the gang unit consisted of three police officers and a supervisor, and then I was the diversion coordinator, or the director of the diversion program. And so, how law enforcement used to say it is, they would catch them and I would clean them, kind of thing. So they would, with any law enforcement initiative, the intelligence they get are from the people that are in it. And there were times that our guys would, intervene on something really bad going down. But anyway, so in developing that program, I did more of the counseling and whatnot, and they did some enforcement, but they were really there to help the kids, and we did education together. But I'll just back up and say that before this gang unit was started, the three cities started noticing some activity in the neighborhood. And let me just say, it's different from mafia life in the standpoint they're juvenile street gangs. And so, the state definition, right, in the penal code is you have three or more individuals with an identifiable sign or symbol who regularly commit crime. Basically, they're in the commission of criminal activity. And so without that last part, you just have like Boy Scouts, right? It's a group of any kind. And so the concern was, criminal activity. And they'd been monitoring some of these kids, and they were more hybrid gangs. Some would come from California and whatnot. In California, you'd have some legit Crips and Bloods and so on. In the mid cities in Dallas and Fort Worth, where I was working, they were more hybrid. And so anyway, but they had, as with any gang initiation, they needed to prove that they were rock solid, and they would do whatever necessary, right, to prove their loyalty. And so the gang unit started, the jump in for this was one of the guys in the area. I think, I don't know how many there were, a small group, maybe about three of them. But they went around looking for something to do, and they stopped into her, they forced their way in. And she's a small, Asian lady, and so they could overpower her very easily. But the one kid, Lamont, basically chased her around the kitchen, caught her in the kitchen, pulled her head back, and cut her throat. And
Mm.
law enforcement, I think, realized at that time that this is pretty serious. It's not just the typical, they're going to go and spray, graffiti, and do something to the buildings in the community. No, it was becoming more and more serious. So that incident is what prompted law enforcement to start a gang unit. And my former boss, he was assistant chief of police. His name was Roy Bell. This guy, man, he was great. He was kind of old school, but at the same time, he's like a walking paradox because he had his finger on the pulse with what was going on with the kids and whatnot. And he really wanted to help these kids by creating something to prevent them from getting to that point that we saw with the kids that were in that, gang initiation. And of course, that's what I love to do too, is working with these kids and really trying to help them. And so that's when I was pulled in to help build a program. But yeah, it became more serious as time went on, and so they that's what happened, and that's what started the gang unit initially in I think it was 93 or 94.
So you mentioned the Cribs, the Bloods.
Hmm.
Was there any other like the Aryan Brothers, or was there
Oh
any other?
yes, the Aryan Brothers, the Tongan gangs, Pacific Islanders. There's a pretty big Pacific Islander population there. Yeah, Aryan Brotherhood. What were some of the other gangs? Oh, I'm sorry. I should have pulled this information up, but yeah, there was a bunch, and so they weren't necessarily like divided by ethnicity or say but they would identify. But there you would find within that particular gang, you would find a number of different differences, not just by ethnicity or whatever. But and then they started getting into more girl gangs, but not the female gangs. But that never really materialized to anything at that point. But yeah, definitely
Well,
some, five deuce, how the Hoover sets and the Crips and the Bloods, and yeah, they had a problem for a while. Hmm.
well, they had. I'm sure they had the Mexican gangs. I'm sure as well.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
Well, maybe MS-13, if not, if not anyone else.
Yeah.
Um, what were the age group that you came across, and from what age to what age?
So with my program, I was responsible from like we wanted to catch them early. So I worked with elementary, junior high, high school, the alternative schools. The older ones were the ones that were more involved in the activity. But I worked well. I got most referrals from junior high. So even though I worked and did some prevention work with the elementary schools, I did a lot with junior highs, to the point where they just gave me an office in one of the schools at one point, and I really loved it. And I would work with both, the guys and the gals, and so I would have like different groups. The guys and the gals would be in separate groups, but there would be a lot of trouble in school, and I ran interference for them quite a bit because you know I was working with them and they wanted me to work with them, and there were things that we were able to do to really I think make a difference in that environment and help some of these kids. So junior high, anywhere from like 13 on. But then you had the younger ones I worked with too. But once they hit the 13, like junior high level, that's where I really started to see them.
Okay, that's kind of like when I started.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
right.
got yeah, no, I got involved in a gang when I was 13.
Hmm.
Um, in Long, in the Long Island area. I mean, the gang was borderline Queens, Long Island.
Hmm.
Um, but I joined the gang for a different reason. For me, it was because I was bullied. See, back in my day, which is probably no different than yours, because we're roughly around the same age.
Hmm.
Um, in the late 70s, when I was in elementary school, there was no programs for bullying. They didn't have it.
Right.
There was no such thing. And um, but you probably came across this. I'm probably something more now than when I was around. When I was a kid, I was bullied every day. I was beat up every day after school. I
Yeah.
was never really. I was a quiet kid. I was an artsy kind of kid at that time, anyway.
Right.
And my parents never were around the house because they're always working. I was raised by my grandparents, so they didn't. My father didn't have the time to teach me how to fight and whatever. So I was not that type of guy. But when I got to junior high school, around the age you're talking about, 13, 12, 13 years old, I met a guy who was Greek like me, and he was the head of a gang called the Bay Boys. and the Bay
Hmm.
Rats was the same name. Um, and I said, okay, wow, look, this guy's Greek. He's the leader of a gang. I looked at it as protection. I looked at it as a cover. And
Right.
I also, like you mentioned about getting initiated. So I had to do something too. So
Right.
I shoplifted. I got
Hmm.
caught, but I didn't get arrested. The cop just let me go and told me not to do it again. That's what they used to do back in those days.
Right. Right.
Um,
That's
and
right.
so that was how I kind of got involved. It was not because I really wanted to be in a gang and I really wanted to do something bad. It was because it was more for protection reasons.
And I'm sure you're
But
sick of being beat up.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm sure you were getting sick of being beat up.
Pretty much. But I started fighting. Then I started fighting a lot. I mean, when I at that point, because you knew you had backup, and I started everybody that picked on me in elementary school. I started fights with them in junior high. I got suspended like 5 times from fighting all the time, and
Hmm.
that's how that's kind of started. And that's how it started with me back in
Right.
those days. And back in
Hmm.
those days, we didn't really use, we didn't, when we had fights, we had rumbles. I said, he used to call them back in the day, like
Right.
after school and blah, blah, blah. And nobody really used guns. We used our fist,
Right.
sometimes a bat, sometimes a knife, whatever. I mean, I got slashed with a knife. I got hit with a pipe, but that
Wow.
was kind of like what we did back then. I'm
Hmm.
sure with you, with the kind of kids you came across, I'm sure their stories were a lot more graphic than what I'm telling you.
You know,
Um,
it's interesting that because, the issues are still the same though, whether it was then or now, I mean, there's still the basic thing, like, just the sense of protection, or the bullying might be different, but the feelings are still the same, of feeling like, I need something in order to be safe. And especially now with like cyberbullying and all that, things can get stirred up real quick. But yeah, with some of the kids that I used to work with, it wasn't dissimilar. I mean, a lot of them, walking to school was a problem, um, or they had older siblings that were involved, and they decided, what, I really am not sure I want to go down this path, and we'd help whoever, his brother, him, and we would intervene and help however we could, but yeah, I mean, it makes sense though. And I think that's important, is to understand, to hear some of these young people out, like, tell me what's going on. Why are you doing this stuff? And they'll tell you. Kids will tell you if they feel safe with you, and they can snip out a phony in a heartbeat, right? But they know if you're legit and if you really care. And once you build that trust with them, they'll tell you what's going on, and then you can work with that. And so,
well,
right?
I'm surprised. I'm a little. I find it interesting that you were able to. I'm assuming you
Mhm.
were able to cultivate relationships with some of these young kids,
Yeah.
and I find that interesting because usually when they're in a gang, they're brainwashed
Right.
to think that everybody outside of this gang, outside of this family, familia, whatever, is
Hmm.
is out for your. They're not out for your best interest. We are.
Right.
We are your
Hmm.
family. We are your. We will spill blood for you, so to speak.
Right. Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
interested on how you were able to um, breach
Right.
that, breach
Right.
it,
Well,
and
especially,
get through.
yeah, like someone like me who looks like me, and who am I? And I think the key is that, first of all, being in the school was helpful, because when they were there, they had the option to talk to me. They were getting out of class. It was like a rotating schedule, so that was a little incentive. They were getting out of class to come talk to me, but also, I don't really look threatening. And so this was, a few years ago now. And I think it's just being real. I can't really explain it either. It's kind of surprising. And to be honest with you, I'm sure when I started the gang unit, I know this for a fact. There were some people that were like, yeah, right. She's going to work with the gang members. And I think, but in that in and of itself was, I think, the secret weapon was I didn't look threatening. And when I talked with them, if you really care about them, well, I knew I had some skills. I'd not just been to school, but, you know, I, I had also worked with them a little bit before. I'd been in the schools, um, and so there was something about that and talking with them, and I'd call them down. There were some that were more resistant than others, and over time, with just being consistent and giving them the option, and basically like listen, I'm here for you. This is your life. The last thing I want to do is tell you what to do. You have enough people doing that. What do you want to do? What do you want to see happen? How can I help you? Like, really? And just to be honest with them and be there for them. And I actually worked with juvenile services. They would have some of these guys and girls would have community service hours for doing something. And they were on probation. So I worked a deal with them that if they would come into the groups and we could work on some things, whether it was a group or individual, that they would get community service hours for that. So we greased the wheels a little bit, and it worked. We gave them some incentive for maybe taking a look at things and talking about it. And if they were going to be there, well, if you're going to be here for an hour, we can make some good use of it, right? But I actually, it was fun with the groups. I had a great time. I mean, and I was in the junior. So Nick, I'm, 5'3", and I'd walk down the hall, and with these junior high kids, they're huge, right? Some of them they're pretty big, right? They'd call me Miss Lady, and they'd run down the hall, Miss Lady, and I would be like, whoa, you guys are you're gonna stomp on me. They're all, but it was just a great relationship that I had with them because they had someone in their corner. And when they got in trouble at school, I would pull them in and talk to them. And I have one in particular where he messed up and he knew he did, and gave him the option to make right with his situation. And I worked a deal with the assistant principal, and the kid went and apologized and made good on it, and realized that he could do that he could turn things around, and that he was a good person. He had a good heart, and he wanted to do the right thing. And sometimes you just have to give kids the opportunity to do that. And so what if they've messed up? You can't label them and put them in that box. They're growing and they're learning. Let them figure out a way to grow up and to learn some skills. And that's what I really tried to do, is tried to help them. They knew I was in their corner. But they also knew I'd hold the line. They knew if, that I would hold the line. I wasn't a pushover. And so that's a very delicate balance, but that's very important to make sure you're holding the line. Like, this is your choice, one
Well,
of, go ahead.
no, but this being that the case,
Mhm.
um, I'm assuming you've had some. Well, let me correct this. Let me say it a different way. Your job was basically to find a way to give these kids another path to redeem themselves and walk away from that kind of life.
Mhm.
Which I
Or not
think
get into it.
sometimes, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, or not get into it at all. Prevent them from getting in. Yeah.
Right. Well, if some of them are already in it, if they're a
Hmm.
crib, if they're a blood, if they're an MS-13 or whatever the case may be, if whatever the gang there may be in, um, and I know that being in that kind of situation, it's a lot different when I was a kid. Back then, kids came and went in gangs. There was no like, you can't leave or you're going to get whacked, or you can't leave or we're going to beat you up or whatever. It wasn't like that back in my day. Kids came and went in gangs all the time. There was no like, there was no, how you say, uh, a loyalty thing where you had to stay with us. You were a part of the family and that's it. Back
Yeah.
then it was a little different. Now, I mean, not now, but in the past maybe 20, 30 years or whatever, um, it was more of like you can't leave. Once you're in, that's it. You're a crib
Right.
for life. You're a blood for life. You're MS-13 for life. or whatever it may be.
Hmm.
How was it possible, or not so much possible? How did you have any um, success, any success stories with any of these kids actually walking away from that life?
Hmm. Well, yes, there have been some when they're at that point too, and they're heavily involved in the gang. Law enforcement is really important for them to have a sense of, a feeling like they can make that change, and they'll work with them in different ways. Sometimes it's I'm trying to. There was one young guy that actually prevented a major. There was supposed to be some serious deal going down where I think there was going to be some guns used and whatnot, and this was in the city of Hearst at the time, and the guy just knew. He's like, I can't, yeah, I can't do this, can't be a part of it, and contacted our, you know, one of our gang unit officers. Back then he was Corporal Wayne Price, and worked with him to basically intervene, and made a decision at that point in time. But he wasn't someone that I worked with, directly, but just know of that. Some of the older ones that I worked with were, some of them didn't really get jumped out, or they would just, as they got older, participate less and less. So it wasn't always a situation where you need to get jumped out or abandoned altogether. It was a matter of, when we call it aging out, even where they got older and it just kind of faded out for them. And so, and bear in mind, it might be a little different too, because these gangs were hybrid. I don't think they had the nucleus like with what you would see maybe in LA or New York. You know what I mean? In terms of some of the
Mhm.
hardcore gang members. But the law enforcement dealt with a lot of the more hardcore gang members. I was there to help with, any counseling. But I stayed, mainly at the junior high. I did see groups. I did have groups at the high school, um, but they weren't as hardcore as that. But I know that this one guy in particular who was very involved was able to successfully get out. But he worked with more with law enforcement to do that than working with me.
Well, that's interesting that you say that because wouldn't that individual or any of these individuals that you work with, that if, well, for example, let's say John Doe, for example, is part of a specific gang. Let's say the you know anyone in particular. We'll just say
Hmm.
the Blue Angels or something. Just making up a name, and he's part of this Blue Angel gang, and he's working with you, and he's working
Hmm.
with law enforcement to some degree at some small level, talking to you,
Hmm.
whatever, going to a counselor.
Hmm.
Um, I would think that individual would be a little bit afraid because if word got out, and oh yeah, I'm going to a oh yeah, that John is going to a counselor. He's talking to law enforcement. He's a rat. That wouldn't they be
Hmm.
afraid of getting jumped? Or like, oh wow, if word got
Hmm.
out that he's
Yeah.
working with you.
Hmm.
So that? How did you guys keep that under wraps and where he wouldn't get hurt
Yeah,
or any of
it's
those
just,
people?
yeah, with any of the intel that these kids gave to like law enforcement, it was all confidential. So it they would, their names wouldn't be mentioned in any way in any capacity. Um, but yeah, I mean, in working with that, when young people are at that point where they're thinking about making this change, they've already been mulling that over for a long time, right? And so there's got to be some reason, some impetus for the change of wanting to get out. And so it's the fear of, this is either it's going to end the same way anyway. If I keep going down this path, I'm going to get killed anyway, or something's going to happen anyway. Or I could try to make good of it and go over here, one way or the other. So, but it's also a matter of, what do you want to see happen? It's got to be that person's decision, and it's not going to be easy, which is why we really doubled down on the prevention, the early intervention. I worked with several kids that had older brothers or sisters, and strangely, a lot of them didn't want their younger siblings involved. but this could be different than what other people have experienced, but that was my experience in working with them, which is interesting because they have a love for their peers. But I think, they've been incarcerated. Some of the older ones, started to really see, some things happen and in their lives where, they were wanting a change sometime.
Well, you touched on something interesting about family. Now, I would
Mm-hmm.
assume a lot of these kids come either from broken families or families with problems or issues or whatever the case may be. Maybe parents that are alcoholics or drug addicts or whatever the case is. Because I think a lot of kids like this, outside of bullying problems, usually try to find family within a gang because they don't have a good family or their
Exactly.
family is a problem and they're looking for support somewhere else,
Exactly.
which I'm sure happens a lot.
Yeah.
Um, did you, when doing what you do, and even law enforcement in general, did you guys have to get permission from
Oh, yeah.
family members? Oh, you did have to do that. Okay.
Yes, I did. So I was in the school, but I was considered what's called an outside provider. So I'd come in the school. So the police departments and the school district all paid for my salary at the time. And I had two assistants that worked with me. And so yeah, um they all owned me basically, but as an outside provider I had a parent consent form, so the parents would have to sign, so they would know, and they would know that things are going to be confidential, and if there's something that, if the child is in danger in any way, if they plan on harming themselves, someone else, or someone's hurting them, it has to be reported. So all that was mentioned in the letter, and didn't really have any problem with getting the consent forms returned. And if there was this was something that was endorsed by the school, so um it was on the up and up, and I was at the school so when this took place. But yeah, we had to get parent consent for sure.
Well, you did this a couple of many years ago, obviously. Um,
And
in your opinion, in your opinion, currently, in the state of what we're in right now in our country and everything, and the way things are going, with all these other, like, I wouldn't even say them gangs anymore. They're more of like, it's more organized. These people are infiltrating different areas of the country. Like I can't pronounce the name, but the Treads the Tres de Agua gang that's from Venezuela that has been all over certain areas of America, which is the street gang, but it's very big, or MS-13 for that matter.
right.
Um, from your experience and your knowledge in this area, um, do you how do you look at the youth in this country now? Do you think they're drawn to that kind of lifestyle or not?
Well, it depends on so many different factors. Number one, where they live, the prevalence of it. But yeah, I mean, I can still, it's again, I mean, they're developmentally, as young people that they are, they have a need to fit in and to feel loved and to have that kind of support. So if they're not getting it, then there could be a number of different things that are going to be attractive to them, and they're going to take one. So yeah, I can see that still being a problem. And I will just back up and say this too. Whenever if we're dealing with, juvenile street gangs, and these guys were pretty hardcore in the gang, I wasn't going to work with anyone who didn't want to get out. For me, like, they had to have some desire to get out. It's hard enough to try to get out when you want to. If you don't want to, it's virtually impossible. I mean, why I call that being upside down, right? Like, I
Hmm.
can't be invested than somebody else and their outcome. So, but yeah, I absolutely see some of this today, and there's a lot more available to young people, Nick, than when you and I were growing up. So much more, right? We didn't have
Exactly
we
right.
didn't have cell phone in our car. I mean, to think of this was like the Jetsons, what we're seeing today, right? That you and I can have
Yeah, pretty much.
our phones,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, right.
Uh,
But there's so much more like cyberbullying, and people are vicious. And I would work with. I'll tell you about a technique that worked pretty well in the schools and for the guys and the girl groups that I would see. Um, well, I'll give you an example of the girl group where it was really very, very vicious. It was ethnically divided between the black gang and the Hispanic gang. And man, and they were mean. They'd say things that were just way below the belt. This was really getting out of hand. And I remember the principal at the time. She sat them all down in a classroom, all these girls that they knew, on both sides, put them in a classroom, and she invited me in there, and she read them the riot act. That listen, um, you're gonna get suspended. Any more incidences, you're gonna get suspended. That's great. So I didn't interrupt her, but then after that meeting, and there were several of the girls who were raising their hand that wanted to talk, to kind of explain themselves or to talk about some things, and she just wasn't having it. So after that meeting, I went up to her. Her name was Linda Densman. She was the principal at the time, and I went and said, Linda, I said, would it be okay for me to call these girls down and have a conversation with them? And she was like, yeah, whatever, but if there's anything you can do. Well, I brought as many of them in at a time, and I just listened to them and had them tell me from their perspective what was going on. And I didn't interrupt them. I let them get everything out. Tell me, is there anything else that you're missing? Tell me everything. And they would, and so on. And then I would say, you know what? If the other group, well, first of all, I'd validate them and say, yeah, that's, you know, sounds, like understandable from your perspective. And so we know it takes two to tango, right? So, you know, there's got to be something, right? And so I said, well, what are you guys doing that you think is perpetuating this that maybe, you could say that you can get a handle on? And they would, say, well, we're doing this, or, okay, all right. So if the other group was willing to maybe have a conversation about this, would you? Probably, yeah, okay, all right. Well, guess what? I did the other thing with the other group. And then I decided I was going to bring them together, do kind of a mediation with them. And I had our SRO, our school resource officer, big tall guy, Jay Alexander was his name, and he was really good with the kids. Anyway, so we after school one day, and basically I gave him the opportunity to share their sides, to be respectful and so on, but to let each other talk, and then I had the ace in the hole because each side had told me something they were doing to kind of to fuel the problem. So when they were done, I would prompt them with, and so what's your role in this? And so each group, anyway, what ended up happening was these girls were every they ended up hugging each other. I mean, they were able to they were able to share some things that really brought them closer together, and they were both willing then to let some things go. And then because of that, it became just this really beautiful experience. They were able to talk about it in a safe place, and so I followed up with, there's a people that weren't in that room that probably needed to hear that you guys have made peace now. So what do you think needs to happen? Oh,
I lost you there for a second. I
so
don't know
so
what
what
happened.
I don't do that's okay. I said, so what do you think needs to happen? And they said, well, we'll tell them, we'll make sure that this doesn't get going again. I said, all right. And I told them I was just really proud of them for, owning up and being mature enough to work through that, because it's exactly what they did. They helped come up with this solution. So we came up with our little contract, and then I said, well, I want all of you to sign this, and I'm going to put in a good word with Ms. Densman and tell her that you guys have agreed to this, and that I put my name on here, and that I believe that you guys are going to stick to this. And so, and I talked to them about the importance of signing their name to a document, that you're giving your word. When you sign your name, you're giving your word. So then, anyway, so after that, and thank the good Lord, we didn't have any other problems with them from that. But because I was in a space where I could actually do that, and if you have someone that knows the culture with these kids, and you're able to work with them in that capacity, then you can make a lot of headway. So what they learned was that even though they had they'd really gone what I would say to the dark side. They were like just doubling down on like the insults, just, wheels off. And so, but that they have the opportunity to make it right. Right. And that's really the beautiful part of it. And, I owe that to my faith and to know that we're, we're all, everyone's going to mess up, but we have the right, or well, I say we have the opportunity, not necessarily always the right, but we have the opportunity to make good of it. And, you know what? I just wanted to give these kids that chance because it's their choice, their life. And if they're going to do it, then they deserve the accolades. And I was willing to give that to them and go to bat for them.
Awesome. Well, to kind of like tie everything together,
Yeah.
um, so that's very interesting what we just shared.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people should know about it. It's very interesting how there is possibilities for young people to redeem themselves and change their life, just like I did myself.
Absolutely.
I didn't have the opportunity to talk to a counselor like
Right.
you. Me, I had to get arrested to realize what I'm doing was wrong. I
Yeah.
had to sit in a cell to really understand, is this for
Mm,
me or not?
yeah.
But I had more of a rude awakening than these other kids had, by having the opportunity to speak with you. But like you said,
Mm.
they didn't have these kind of programs when we were young.
You didn't have a
Um,
problem. But look at going the hard way though, Nick. Look at where you are. Right? That's pretty awesome. Right?
yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
Oh,
um, you know, we we all fall off the chair sometimes, but it is what it is. Um,
right.
but to tie the whole show together, just to give us a little bit of quickly, um, what Carrie's doing now, what are you up
Okay.
to? That would something that can educate everybody here outside of the gang unit that you work with, which is very interesting. Um, if you can give us a little snapshot of what you're up to now, that'd be
Sure.
great.
Okay. So, after working at the gang, I was in higher education. I taught in college for many years, and during that time, I built different community coalitions for the benefit of helping these young people, and being in college for a long time, and just understanding maybe even some gaps in learning about how our country is run, or even about our history. And I love our country, and our country is diverse. I mean, my grandfather's mother was from Ireland. His father was from Scotland, and I mean, I just feel like we're all here, on different paths, and this is just a great country. And but I realize that a lot of these young kids are not getting some accurate information. And so I've started an initiative. It's a website and like a little podcast for some of these kids to get some good content, but to also plug into like the community. I think it's really important for them to understand that this is their community, and they can plug in ways that make really meaningful differences to help other people, like legitimately help, but they can build on that and build their reputation for the rest of their lives and not be in fear that they're messing up, or whatever, or to be watching over their back. And look, at there's no shame on anybody's journey. I even people that have been involved, like in the mafia, or have been involved in these street gangs. People have their journeys, and I believe that they make their decisions with the best information they have at the time. And so I want to be able to help them when they're able to engage, but young enough still, when that they can maybe develop a trajectory that's going to be proactive, and help them make a good living with their potential that they want to make and do with their lives. And so that's what this new initiative is really all about, is helping them to plug in with some of the nonprofits, some of the veterans, um, working with some of our legislators, working with hospitals, working with underprivileged kids, or whatever, just having them work in a capacity where they're helping other people, and maybe even getting some credit through the school for that. One of the things that one of our teenagers did was he was able to go around the school and interview his teachers, not about who they voted for, but just asking, what was your first time voting experience like? And so that, we were able to take advantage of that, and kids like to watch it and hear what their teachers have to say. So I'm just trying to empower them to really get involved in their community, make sure that they understand what our country's all about, the opportunities they have available to them, and just help them, become involved in ways that maybe they didn't have the opportunity to do before. So that's what I'm doing
Awesome.
now.
Well, can you tell before we end the show, can you tell us where we can find this show, the podcast, like you just mentioned? What is it? What's the name of it and stuff like that?
Okay, so it's just getting off the ground, but it's called the Texas Patriot Civics and Education, and the website is www.thetexaspatriot.org. So it's
Awesome.
www.thetexaspatriot.org.
Beautiful. Well,
Yeah.
Carrie, listen, it was awesome having you on the show. Thanks a lot for all that great information. Um, and with that, I wish you a lot of luck. I definitely want to check it out. That website myself, um,
Mhm.
because I'm a New York Patriot. Um,
Yes.
not
Yes.
the football team, not the
I love
so
it. Nick,
so
it's
again,
such a pleasure getting to know you. I mean, man, thank you so much for having me on your show. And hello to everybody out there listening. I really appreciate the opportunity.
yeah, same here. Well, thank you, Carrie, and I wish you all the luck in the world, and let's stay in touch.
Okay, let's do it.
You got
All
it.
right. Take care.
Thank you.